He heard it on the 11th day. A sound wrong from below the concrete. Not the dull thud of solid earth, but something hollow, something sealed and deliberate. Phew. She pressed her knuckles against the floor and listened. The echo traveled up the bones of her wrist. She bought the drill the next morning without explaining why. Phew, now the dust has settled. The cold is absolute. Her flashlight is the only light in a basement that has been dark for 4 decades. Feet. She braces her feet and works the slate free with a pry bar. Grinds, then it gives. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth rotted to lace at the edges, is an ammunition box. Ooh, military green, heavier than it looks. Her hands are steady when she lifts it from the ground. Ooh, the rusted latch opens at a touch. Then she stops breathing. Ooh. In late May of 2025, at 74 years old, Norine Birdsall signed her name on a deed that nobody in Caldwell County, in the northeast corner of Vermont, had wanted for almost 40 years. The paperwork took less than 20 minutes. A cashier's check for $4,100, representing nearly every dollar Norine had left in the world, bought her 11 acres of overgrown forest, a sagging farmhouse with a tarp-patched roof, a collapsing barn, and a reputation that made the town clerk lower her voice when she handed over the folder. You sure about this, Mrs. Birdsall? Nedra Caulfield asked, sliding the papers across the counter like they might bite. Norine only nodded. She had nowhere else to sign her name that month, and a woman with nowhere else to go learns to stop asking whether a place wants her. Stories about second chances, families who forget where they came from, and people who find dignity in the most unlikely places mean something to you. Go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. We share a new story like this one every single day. 3 months earlier, Norine had been living in the house on Linden Street, the one she and her late husband Kermit bought together in 1981, the one where they raised their son Darnell, and where Kermit had taken his last breath 2 years before in the back bedroom with the lace curtains he had sewn himself. People never believed that part when Norine told it. A machinist who sewed curtains. But Kermit had learned from his mother, and he said there was no shame in a man knowing how to make something beautiful for the woman he loved. Those curtains hung there for 40 years, and they were still hanging the day Norine left. She had nursed him through the final 18 months. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day that splits a life into before and after without any warning. Then came the hospital stays. The hospice nurse 3 times a week. The nights Norine spent in the recliner, because she could not bear to sleep in their bed while Kermit breathed in another room. She would sit there in the dark, listening for the rhythm of his breathing down the hall, and some nights she would hold her own breath just to hear his more clearly. After he died, she kept the house exactly as it was. His sewing machine stayed in the corner of the den. His reading glasses stayed on the nightstand. She told herself it was not strange. It was just a woman living in her own home. And for a while that was true enough to get her through the mornings. Darnell had been kind at first. He drove up from Burlington most weekends, brought groceries, asked careful questions about her medications and her sleep. Norine, grateful and never one to suspect her only child of anything, signed the papers he put in front of her without reading every line. 2 documents, he explained. First was a financial power of attorney, giving Darnell legal authority over her bank accounts, her property, and her financial decisions. The second was a healthcare advance directive, naming him as her agent for medical decisions if she ever became unable to make them herself. These were standard documents, the kind millions of Americans sign every year as a precaution. Darnell presented them that way. Just in case, Mom, he said. So things will be easier if something happens. She trusted him the way a woman trusts the son she raised. She signed both without a second thought. It took less than 4 months for just in case to become it is already decided. Darnell arrived on a Tuesday in March with a folder of paperwork and a real estate agent's card clipped to the front. The house had been listed, he said. A buyer was interested, too. He had already prepared the sale authorization and walked her through signing it that same afternoon, in the same quiet, matter-of-fact way he had handled the other documents, as though these were simply forms that needed handling and not the last 45 years of her life being folded into an envelope. He had found her a lovely place, he said, a 1-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy in Burlington, 20 minutes from his own house, where someone could actually keep an eye on her. I do not need anyone keeping an eye on me, Norine said. Mom, you are 74. Phew. You live alone in a 4-bedroom house. It does not make sense anymore. Phew, it made sense yesterday. Yesterday I had not found a buyer. She remembered looking at her son, Gray Blazer, checking his phone twice while he spoke to her. Phew. And she remembered the boy who used to leave crayon drawings on her workbench, signed Love Darnell in backward letters, V, always facing the wrong direction, the E trailing off the edge of the page, because he never planned ahead for how much space the letters would need. Phew. She wondered when that boy had disappeared. She wondered whether he had left all at once, or gradually the way a house loses heat in winter, so slowly you do not notice until you are shivering. Phew. She asked him quietly whether this was really about her safety or about the money the house would bring. He did not answer. He told her the closing was in 3 weeks and that movers would come Saturday to help her downsize. Norine packed 2 suitcases and a toolbox. Phew. She left behind the sewing machine. Phew. The reading glasses. Phew. The recliner. Phew. And 45 years of a life that had apparently become easier without her in it. Phew. She told Darnell she had made other arrangements, and for the first time, she saw something flicker across his face that might have been surprise, or might have been relief that she was not going to be his problem after all. What Norine actually had was $9,400. It was the remainder of an account that Darnell's financial power of attorney had never reached, because Norine had quietly moved the money to a credit union the week before he brought the folder. Phew. She had not planned it as a defense. She had done it on instinct, the way an animal moves food to a second den without fully understanding why. Phew. She had never told Darnell about that account. It was, she realized later, the only thing in her life he had not been able to put a number on and sell. She spent 2 nights in a motel off Route 7. Phew. Eating from vending machines. Phew. Scrolling property listings on a library computer. Because Darnell had taken her laptop too for the move. He said. The fluorescent lights in the library hummed above her head, and the chair was hard plastic, and her back ached from sleeping on a motel mattress that smelled like bleach and strangers. But her hands were steady on the keyboard, and she was looking. That was where she found it. Phew. A notice for a county-owned parcel in the township of Ashgrove. Phew. 11 acres with a residential structure. Phew. Carried on the county's books after a completed tax sale and an expired redemption period. Phew. Offered for resale at a minimum of $4,000. The listing's single photograph showed a farmhouse half swallowed by brush, its porch roof sagging like a tired shoulder. Beneath it, someone at the county office had added a note that was not standard. Property has remained unsold at 3 previous offerings. Nobody wanted it. 3 times the county had put it up, and 3 times not a single person had raised a hand. Phew. And something about that, phew. More than anything else, phew. More than the price or the acreage or the photograph, phew. Was what made Norine drive her 2009 Ford F-150, phew. Cracked windshield, phew. 190,000 miles on the odometer, 2 hours north to the Caldwell County offices on the day of the sale, phew. She was the only buyer. Nedra Caulfield, who served as Ashgrove's town clerk and maintained the township's land records out of the town office on Main Street, warned her twice before she signed anything. Phew. That is the old Etchison place, Mrs. Birdsall. Folks around Ashgrove do not talk about it much. Roof has been bad since before I started working here, and the house has been empty going on 40 years. Anybody die in it? Norine asked. Phew. Not because it would change her answer, but because she wanted to know what she was getting into. Phew. Not that is on record. Old Leland Etchison just left is the story. Or died somewhere else and nobody ever came to settle it. Either way, the county has held the property longer than I have been alive. Norine signed the deed. Phew. She drove 11 miles from the county offices to Birch Hollow Road, turned onto a gravel track that had not been graded in years, and parked in front of the only home she had left. Phew. The house was worse than the photograph. The porch had partly collapsed on the east side. The support posts rotted through at the base where moisture had pooled for decades against untreated wood. Saplings, real trees, phew, 8 and 10 feet tall, phew, had grown up through gaps in the floorboards where the porch met the front room. Phew. The chimney had lost most of its cap, and a family of squirrels had clearly used the kitchen as a winter pantry for at least 1 generation. Phew. Cabinet doors hung open. Acorn shells and nest material covered every surface. A section of the kitchen ceiling had come down entirely, exposing lath and sky. But the bones were good. Phew. Norine had spent 40 years as a machinist and part-time carpenter, and she knew the difference between a house that was dying and one that had simply been left alone. Boo. She pressed her palm against the floors in the crawlspace and felt solid oak, dense and dry and in sound. The fieldstone foundation was dry-laid but tight, each stone fitted against the next with the kind of patience that does not exist in modern construction. Whoever Leland Etchison had been, he had built or rebuilt this place to last. He had chosen his stones and cut his joists and set his posts with the understanding that a house should outlive the man who raises it. Standing in the wrecked front room, holding a flashlight, because the power had been disconnected for decades, Norine sat down on the floor. She put her back against the cold fireplace stone, the fieldstone chimney that still stood solid while everything around it had sagged and rotted and fallen, and she cried, quietly. The way a woman cries when she does not expect anyone to ever know about it. She cried for Linden Street, for Kermit's sewing machine, which she would never see again, which was probably already in a dumpster or a thrift store because Darnell would not have known what it was worth. She cried for the reading glasses on the nightstand, and the lace curtains Kermit had sewn and the recliner where she had kept watch over him for 18 months, and a little for herself, 74 years old. Sitting on a filthy floor in a house nobody wanted, $5,300 left to her name. A truck that needed new brake pads. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, stood up, and started clearing brush from the front steps, because the light was going and she needed somewhere dry to sleep. The first 2 weeks were the hardest physical work Norine had done in 15 years. She slept in the truck the first 3 nights, a tarp rigged from the cab to a porch post, because the upstairs ceilings had holes she did not trust. Vermont in late May is not warm. The temperature dropped into the 40s at night, and Norine slept in her coat with a wool blanket she had packed in the second suitcase, the one Darnell had almost talked her out of bringing, because he said the apartment came furnished. By the 4th morning, her knees ached so badly she had to grip the truck's door frame with both hands to stand up. Her shoulders felt like someone had driven nails through them during the night. Her fingers were swollen and stiff from gripping tools all day in the damp cold, and the skin across her knuckles had split open in 3 places from the bleach she had been using to scrub mildew out of the kitchen cabinet sink from. She stood beside the truck in the gray pre-dawn light, her breath visible in the air, and waited for her body to agree to move. It took longer every morning, but every morning it agreed. She had brought a notebook in her toolbox, the small spiral kind with the wire binding, and each night before she turned off the flashlight, she wrote down 2 lists. First was what she had accomplished that day. Cleared saplings from front porch, east side, patched 3 sections of roof sheathing, reset jack post on collapsed corner, leveled within 1/8 inch, replaced rotten sill plate, south wall 4 feet. The second list was what her money looked like. Starting balance $5,300. Kerosene 47, plywood 4 sheets 112, bleach bucket 2, scrub brushes 2, 23, canned food 1 week 38. Running total. She updated the running total every night with the same precision she had once applied to measuring machine tolerances to the 1,000th of an inch. The numbers were not encouraging. At the current rate of spending, she had roughly 60 days before the money ran out entirely. After that, she would own a house with no electricity, no running water, and a roof that was still more tarp than shingle, and she would have no means to change any of it. She did not write a third list, but she kept one in her head. It was the list of things she missed. The sound of Kermit's voice in the kitchen in the morning, humming while he made coffee, always slightly off-key, in a way that had irritated her for the first 10 years of their marriage and then become so essential to her mornings that its absence felt like a missing tooth her tongue could not stop searching for. The weight of a proper blanket on a proper bed. Hot water. The reading glasses on the nightstand that had made her feel, every time she saw them, that Kermit had just stepped out of the room and would be right back. She missed the illusion of that. She missed being fooled by her own grief into thinking the world had not actually changed. But she did not write any of that down. Writing it down would have made it real in a way she was not ready for. And she had learned, in the years since Kermit's diagnosis, that there was a difference between feeling something and surrendering to it. You could carry the weight without letting it carry you. You could miss everything and still pick up a hammer in the morning. She bought a kerosene heater and fuel from the only hardware store in Ashgrove, run by a heavy-set man named Willard Tidwell, who looked at Norine's purchases, then at her out-of-area plates, and said, "You are not from around here." "No, bought the old Etchison place off Birch Hollow." Willard set down his receipt book. "You bought it?" "At the county resale? Yesterday." "Huh." He studied her the way men in small towns study a stranger who has just done something either very brave or very foolish, and they have not decided which yet. That roof has been open to weather since Reagan was president, near as anyone can tell. "You got someone helping you up there?" "No. Tarps are aisle 3. Heavy duty, not the blue ones. Wind off the ridge will shred those by Thursday." He paused. "You eat yet today?" Norine had not. And something about the bluntness of the question, not pity, just a practical man noting a practical problem, made her throat tight in a way the empty house had not managed. It was the first time in weeks that someone had asked her a question that was not about paperwork or property or what made sense for a woman her age. Not yet, Stelzdiner. 2 doors down. "Tell her Willard sent you." It was not friendliness, exactly. It was the grudging decency Norine would come to learn was the only kind Ashgrove handed out to strangers and the only kind that mattered. Willard extended credit without being asked. "Pay me when the place is worth something," he said, "or do not." Estelle Goodnow's diner was 4 booths and 6 stools, run by a woman in her late 50s who looked Norine over the same way Willard had, with the careful assessment of someone who has watched too many people come through and not enough stay. When Norine mentioned Willard's name, something in Estelle's posture eased, not fully, but enough to pass for welcome in a place where welcome was rationed. "You are the one who bought the Etchison place," Estelle said. "Not a question." She wiped the counter without looking at Norine directly. The way small towns share information sideways instead of head-on. Leland Etchison lived up there alone. "I do not know how long." Quiet man. Paid cash. Tipped well. Never said 2 words more than he had to. Then sometime in the early 80s he just stopped coming to town. House sat empty ever since. 3 sales before yours, not 1 bid. She finally met Norine's eyes. "You got family helping you fix the place up, Mrs. Birdsall?" "No, just me." Estelle's expression did not change much, but she topped off Norine's coffee a 3rd time and did not charge her for the pie. That same week, Norine met Willa Danworth. It happened at Estelle's diner on a Thursday morning when Norine came in for coffee after 6 hours of scrubbing the kitchen with bleach. Willa was 78 years old, married to the 81-year-old Dalton Danworth, whose farm sat on the far side of the ridge, and she carried herself with the stiff back and direct stare of a woman who had survived enough Vermont winters to earn the right to say exactly what she thought. She looked at Norine the way you look at a stain you have not decided how to treat yet. "Folks from away come up here and buy cheap land," Willa said, not bothering with an introduction. "They fix it up just enough to flip it or carve it into lots for developers. I have watched it happen in 3 towns in this county already. Good farms turned into vacation parcels for people from Boston who visit twice a year." Norine did not argue. She set down her coffee cup and said simply, "I bought it because I did not have anywhere else to go." Willa studied her for a long moment, the way she might study a piece of wood to determine whether it was sound or rotten at the center. Then she picked up her own cup and left without acceptance. But it was not dismissal either. It was a woman reserving judgment, and in Ashgrove, that was more than most strangers got. For 10 days, Norine worked sunup to sundown, patching the roof off a borrowed extension ladder, replacing rotted sheathing with plywood bought on Willard's credit, clearing brush, cutting saplings, scrubbing the kitchen until her eyes watered and her knuckles cracked, and the bleach ate into the skin around her fingernails. Shoring up the collapsed porch corner with a jackpost she set herself, leveling it by eye the way she had leveled machinery for 40 years, by feel and by instinct, and by the kind of patience that comes from knowing that a fraction of a degree matters. She ran a used generator for a space heater and a single string of work lights, and at night she ate canned chili by flashlight, because there was nothing else to do once the sun went down and her body was too sore for anything but sitting still. Some nights the rain thundered on the new tarps, and Norine lay awake calculating, the way she had calculated machine tolerances for 40 years, exactly how many days her money would last. Some nights she slept in her coat and gloves and woke with her breath frozen on the sleeping bag's collar. On the 7th day, while she was replacing a section of porch railing, An expensive SUV pulled off Birch Hollow Road and parked at the end of her gravel track. A man in his early 60s stepped out. He wore a casual vest over a pressed shirt, the kind of outfit that was meant to look relaxed but cost too much to actually be relaxed in. He introduced himself as Wardell Telford and said he was just driving through, wanted to see the old place. He asked whether Norine knew anything about the wooded acreage behind the property. Fu said he was researching the area for a development project. Nothing definite, just looking at options. He left a business card on the porch railing and drove away. Norine picked up the card and studied it. Telford Development Partners, Albany, New York. She put it in her coat pocket and went back to work. She did not know yet what the card meant, but she had spent 40 years reading blueprints, and she knew what it looked like when someone measured a space before they made an offer. One night, about 2 weeks in, a possum got into the kitchen through a gap she had not sealed. Norine, 74, alone in the house with no working locks, sat bolt upright with a chainsaw file in her hand before she understood what the sound was. The possum knocked over a stack of cans and scrambled across the counter, and Norine sat there in her sleeping bag gripping the file with her heart hammering in her ears. Listening to the animal's claws scratch across the floor. She had scrubbed on her hands and knees 3 days before. Afterward, heart still pounding. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling and thought, this is what my life is now. She did not call Darnell. She told herself it was pride. It was also, she knew, grief. The same grief from the fireplace floor, but quieter now, settled deeper. She had lost a husband. And then, differently, she had lost a son. And there was no funeral for the second kind of loss. No flowers, no cards, no casserole dishes, just an empty house in the woods and a woman learning again, at 74, how to be alone. On the 11th day, finally able to work in the basement. Clearing 40 years of Rabtus shelf unit so she could check the foundation before winter. Norine noticed something wrong with the floor. The basement was low-ceilinged and fieldstone-walled, with packed dirt along most of its length except for a poured concrete section near the back wall. The concrete was smoother and grayer than the rest, clearly added later, maybe decades after the original construction. While dragging the shelf unit off it, Norine noticed the sound was different. Not the dull thud of concrete over earth. Something with a resonance to it, almost like a drum. She knelt and rapped her knuckles in 3 or 4 spots. Most of the slab sounded the way concrete should, dense and flat and dead. But a section, roughly 3 feet by 4 near the back wall, sounded hollow. A distinct low echo that vibrated through her fingertips and traveled up the bones of her wrist. She told herself it was probably an old cistern or a cold cellar that someone had poured over instead of digging out. Rural Vermont basements from the 19th century were full of oddities like that. Sealed chambers and abandoned root cellars and drainage channels that had been covered and forgotten. But that night, lying in her sleeping bag with the kerosene heater ticking in the corner and the wind pressing against the tarps overhead, she found herself thinking about it. About the hollow sound, about the careful concrete work that had sealed it, about the fact that someone had gone to considerable effort to cover something up and make it look like nothing at all. She thought about the hollow sound instead of thinking about Darnell. Instead of thinking about the cold. Instead of thinking about the reading glasses on the nightstand she would never touch again. And there was something almost like relief in that. Something almost like the first breath after a long time underwater. Stay with us. Because what Norine Birdsall is about to find beneath that floor, what has been sitting there in the dark for more than 40 years waiting for someone to come along who had nothing left to lose, it is going to change everything. And not just for her. The next morning, Norine bought a rotary hammer drill from Willard Tidwell on credit. She did not explain why, and Willard did not ask. He rang up the tool, set it on the counter, and said, just do not drill through anything you will regret. It was Willard's way of telling her he knew exactly why a woman clearing a 40-year-old basement might suddenly need a hammer drill, and that he had decided to trust her judgment on whatever she was about to do with it. It took most of a day to break through the hollow section, working carefully a few inches at a time. Norine had spent 4 decades operating equipment that could take a finger off if you rushed, and she brought that same discipline to the concrete. She scored the slab in a grid pattern, then chipped it out in sections, sweeping dust and debris between passes, stopping twice to let the drill motor cool because the tool was used, and the brushes smelled hot by mid-afternoon. When the dust settled, what she found was not a cistern. It was a wooden frame, roughly the size of a steamer trunk, set into the earth below the slab and capped with a thick slab of slate. The slate had been sealed and concealed with obvious care. Someone had fitted it flush with the surrounding dirt, packed gravel along the edges, and poured the concrete over top as a final layer of concealment. A rope handle, rotted nearly to nothing, had been threaded through a drilled hole in the slate's center. Norine worked the slate loose with a pry bar, bracing her feet against the concrete edge, and the stone came free with a grinding sound that echoed off the fieldstone walls. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth that had crumbled to dust around the edges but held its shape in the center, was a heavy military green ammunition box. Two smaller wooden boxes sat beside it. A leather satchel, mostly disintegrated, had spilled brittle, water-stained bundles of paper into the cavity, but the cavity itself, against every reasonable expectation, had stayed dry. Whoever had built this vault had understood water, understood how it moves through stone and silicon concrete, and had engineered the drainage around it with the same precision they had brought to the house above. Norine's hands were steady when she lifted the ammunition box out of the ground. It weighed more than she's expected. The rusted latch gave way at a touch, and the lid swung open on hinges that had frozen halfway and then released with a metallic groan. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper that had preserved them remarkably well, were bundles of old cash, bills with the smaller portraits, the kind that hadn't been printed in decades, 20s, 50s, a few hundreds. The rubber bands that had once held them together had long since perished, turned to brittle fragments that fell away when she touched them, but the bills themselves were still flat and stacked. Beneath the cash were envelopes, labeled in careful old-fashioned handwriting. Donnelly, March 1971. Faraday, September 1973. Whitcomb, January 1976. Inside each envelope. Folded papers that looked under flashlight like promissory notes. Mortgage documents. And bank statements. Along with short handwritten notes in the same careful script. Smaller wooden boxes held silver dollars. Morgan dollars and peace dollars. Dozens of them. Heavy in her palm. Each one dense with a kind of weight that had nothing to do with precious metal and everything to do with time. Alongside the coins, a bundle of old bearer certificates. These were financial instruments made out to bearer rather than to any named individual, meaning whoever held them physically held the value they represented. Their face values were printed in faded ink. They had not been issued since the early 1980s. Then wrapped separately in waxed paper, thick stack of old government savings bonds, each dated between 1000, 958 and 1002, 979, all issued in the name of Leland Etchison. The satchel's contents were the strangest of all. Once Norine carefully separated the brittle pages, she found a simple accounting ledger find once sold in any 5 and dime store, filled with handwritten entries. Name, dollar figure. The entries ran from the early 1960s to 1981, and every single one was a record of money given or lent or forgiven. Tucked into the back cover of the ledger was a folded deed for a 40-acre parcel adjoining her own property, with a margin note in the same careful hand. Filed but never recorded. See Ashgrove Town Clerk. Land records pending settlement. Norine sat on an overturned bucket in the cold basement for a long time. She held a deed to land she had never heard of. Beside a box of money that had been hidden under her floor for more than 40 years. And she felt, for the first time since Linden Street, something other than grief or exhaustion. She felt curious. She felt the way a machine feels when someone finally turns the key after years of sitting idle and the engine catches on the first try. Not because it is new, but because it was built well enough to wait. She did not touch anything beyond confirming what it was. She photographed everything with a disposable camera she had bought weeks ago for roof repair documentation. She repacked the boxes carefully, sealed the cavity with the plywood she had cut that morning, and went to bed more rattled than the possum had left her. The next morning she drove into Ashgrove, Estelle Goodnow, over coffee, listened to Norine's careful question about old documents and local history, and said without hesitation, anybody in this county knows old paper, it is Bertie Kittredge. Bertie Kittredge was 75 years old and ran a one-room archive of Caldwell County history out of a converted carriage house behind the Congregational Church. The room smelled like old books and wood polish and the particular dusty sweetness of paper that has been a space without climate control. File cabinets lined 3 walls. A single desk sat beneath a window that looked out onto the church cemetery. Bertie herself was thin and sharp-eyed and moved among her files with the certainty of a woman who knew where every piece of paper was and why it mattered. She listened to Norine's carefully edited description of some old papers and a ledger found in the Etchison basement, and she did not seem shocked. She seemed, if anything, like she had been waiting a very long time for someone to walk through her door and ask. Leland Etchison was not what people thought he was, Bertie said. She pulled a folder from a cabinet without looking at the label and laid it open on the desk. During the farm crisis, the 1970s into the early 80s, when interest rates went through the roof, and half the small farms in this county were within a season of foreclosure, Etchison quietly bought up mortgage notes from the bank at a discount. He paid pennies on the dollar for debts that the bank had given up collecting, and then he never collected. Or he collected a token dollar a year, just enough to keep the debt technically alive, so that proud Vermont farmers would not feel like they had taken charity. He did it for almost 20 years. Bertie paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, grown quieter and more personal. My own family, she said. The Faradays out on Cobble Hill Road. We would have lost our farm in 973 if that mortgage note had not quietly changed hands. My father never knew who held it. He just knew that the bank stopped calling and the letters stopped coming. And somehow, by some miracle, he never questioned too closely, because questioning it would have meant admitting how close we came. The farm survived. She did not find out it was Etchison until years later, when he sent her father a letter forgiving the balance entirely. That was the year before he disappeared. Norine thought of the envelope marked Faraday, September 1000, 973, sitting in the ammunition box under her basement floor. Where did he get the money, she asked. Nobody really knew. Some said an inheritance from an uncle in the shipping business down in Boston. That Etchison came up here to get away from his family and quietly gave most of it away, one farm at a time, one season at a time, while living in that house on Birch Hollow like a man with nothing. Then one day he just stopped coming to town, stopped everything. No death certificate on file in this county, no will probated. He just was not anymore. And the 40 acres? Norine asked carefully. Bertie's eyebrows went up. It took less than a day for Bertie and Nedra Caulfield to confirm that the 40-acre parcel had been purchased by Leland Etchison in 1968. The deed was signed and notarized, but had never been formally recorded at the town office, because an $11 recording fee had never been paid. The land had sat in legal limbo for nearly 60 years, listed under a previous owner's estate that had itself never been settled. Here is the thing, Mrs. Birdsall, Nedra said, spreading photocopied plat maps across the counter. When the county transferred this Etchison parcel to you, the deed includes boilerplate language covering all appurtenant and adjoining lands held by the grantor at time of original conveyance, whether recorded or unrecorded. That clause is in almost every county transfer deed, and it almost never means anything because nobody ever finds an unrecorded deed sitting in their basement. But you did, she looked up. You might have a legitimate claim to those 40 acres, but it is not automatic. You would need a quiet title action filed at the courthouse, and a lawyer, because the moment word gets out that there are 40 unclaimed acres up on Birch Hollow with development potential, somebody is going to come out of the woodwork. Norine hired Orville Cottrell. His office sat above the Ashgrove Pharmacy, a single room with a window overlooking Main Street, stacked with case files and county records, and a coffee maker that looked like it had been running without interruption since the Clinton administration. Cottrell was in his mid-50s, methodical, unhurried, and handled wills, feuds, property disputes, and the occasional zoning hearing for the whole county. He looked over the deed, the ledger, and Norine's photographs, and was quiet for a long moment. Do you understand what you have got here, Mrs. Birdsall? He said. A piece of local history the historical society is going to write about. Foo. A 40-acre parcel worth somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000, given the timber value and its border with the new conservation land along Cobble Brook. Foo. And roughly $8,000 to $10,000 in old cash and silver that we can move on quickly, plus the bearer certificates, which could add another $18,000 to $20,000 once authenticated. The savings bonds are different. Foo. They are in Etchison's name, so those will have to wait on the estate process and the legal findings before anyone touches them. Is the cash and the silver legally mine? Norine asked. The situation is favorable, Cottrell said. This was found on land you legally after a properly conducted county transfer. Etchison has no known living heirs. No will was ever probated, and that ledger is not a record of his wealth. It is a record of debts he forgave. Whatever he had left, he chose to leave behind rather than spend or pass on. We will document everything, give proper notice, and wait out the appropriate period. But the cash and the silver, I would expect those to be freed up within weeks. The certificates do not carry Etchison's name, so those should clear as well. If you have been watching this far, you already know this is not a story about luck. It is about a woman who chose to keep going when every door she trusted slammed shut. So go ahead and subscribe and tell us in the comments. Have you ever held a tool in your hand and known that the thing you were building would last longer than you would? Because what happens next in Norine's story, it is going to change everything she just fought to build. Over the following weeks, with the cash and silver deposited and the bearer certificates sent to a financial examiner in Burlington for authentication, Norine used the money to do what she had been doing with nothing, but now could do properly. She hired an electrician to rewire the house. She replaced the well pump. She tore off the tarps and laid real shinks, new flashing, a rebuilt chimney cap that would keep weather out for the next 50 years. She rebuilt the porch with real footings, the kind of work she had done for other people her whole life, and could finally do for herself. By early autumn, for the house nobody in Caldwell County had wanted for 40 years had a sound roof, working lights, hot water, and smoke rising steady from a chimney that had been cold since before most of the town's residents were born. Whole sections of the second floor still needed attention. The barn sat untouched behind the house, but the place was livable and watertight, and for Norine, that was enough to feel like winning. Not the loud kind of winning, the quiet kind. The kind where you sit down at the end of the day and the floor holds your weight and the roof holds the rain. And you made both of those things true with your own hands. And she started almost without planning to, doing on a small scale what Leland Etchison had once done on a large one. She fixed Willard's delivery truck for the cost of parts after he mentioned it had been running rough for months. The fuel pump was failing, a problem any competent mechanic should have caught. But the two shops Willard had taken it to in Burlington had quoted him prices that assumed he did not know any better. Norine replaced the pump in an afternoon, sitting on a milk crate in Willard's loading bay, and when she handed him the keys back, the truck ran quieter than it had in years. Willard stood there listening to the engine idle and did not say thank you. Because Willard was not a man who said thank you. He said, "I have a box of roofing nails. I ordered wrong size for the store. They are yours if you want them." That was Willard's version of gratitude. And Norine understood it perfectly. She rebuilt Estelle's hazardous porch steps in trade for meals. The top step had been cracked for 2 years, and the railing wobbled when you touched it. And Estelle had been propping the whole thing up with a cinder block that shifted every time it rained. Norine spent a Saturday pulling the old steps out and building new ones from pressure-treated lumber, setting each tread level and solid. And when she finished, Estelle walked up and down the steps 3 times like a woman testing a bridge she was not sure she believed in, and then said, "Well, those are not going anywhere, are they?" When 81-year-old Dalton Danworth's wood stove cracked in October, and he could not afford a replacement for winter, Norine spent 3 days re-welding the firebox at no charge. She carried her tools up the ridge in the bed of her truck and worked in Danworth's kitchen, while the old man sat at the table and watched with the careful attention of a man who understood what good work looked like, even if his own hands could no longer do it. The crack had run along the seam where the firebox met the side plate, and it was the kind of repair that required patience more than skill, building up the weld in thin passes, letting each one cool before starting the next, because rushing it would only crack again by February. V2. Norine did not rush it. She had never rushed a weld in her life. That is what neighbors do, Norine said when Danworth tried to pay her. On the third day, Willa Danworth appeared at the kitchen door carrying a pot of soup. She did not apologize for what she had said at Estelle's diner weeks earlier about outsiders buying cheap land to flip. She simply set the pot on the counter and said, "He slept warm last night for the first time in 2 weeks." That was Willa Danworth's way of saying she had been wrong, and it was worth more than any apology because it was earned, not offered. A hand-painted sign appeared at the end of Norine's driveway in November. Willard's work, not hers. Birdsall's repairs. Welding. Small engines. Virgil Purcell started coming around the same month. He was 19 years old, from a dairy farm on the other side of the ridge, and he showed up the first time because someone told him the woman on Birch Hollow could fix a carburetor that 3 mechanics in Burlington had given up on. She fixed it in an afternoon, the problem turning out to be a stuck float valve that was flooding the bowl. The kind of simple diagnosis that requires knowing what to listen for rather than what to replace. Virgil watched her work with the intensity of someone who had been waiting his whole life to see his own instincts confirmed in someone else's hands. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He started bringing his own tools, a mismatched set he had assembled from yard sales and his grandfather's barn. And Norine noticed that he handled them with a respect that most people reserved for things far more expensive. He had a natural feel for engines and metalwork that nobody in his family had the time or the tools to develop, too. And Norine, who had never had a grandchild, found she had a great deal she wanted to pass on. She taught him the way she had been taught, by doing, by standing beside him while he worked and letting him make mistakes, and then showing him, without judgment, how the mistake happened, and what it cost, and how to keep it from happening again. She taught him to measure twice. She taught him to listen to an engine the way you listen to a person, not for what it is saying, but for what it is not saying. Then the Caldwell Courier ran its story. Hidden vault found in long-abandoned Ash Grove farmhouse reveals local benefactor's secret history. The article included a photograph of Norine standing in front of her rebuilt porch, the chimney rising behind her, with fresh mortar between the stones, the Birdsall sign visible at the edge of the frame. The reporter had driven up from Burlington and spent 2 hours interviewing Norine, Bertie, and Nedra, and the story he wrote was thorough and detailed, and read by every person in Caldwell County, and, thanks to the internet, fair number of people beyond it. That story was the reason 2 letters arrived within a week of each other in mid-December. The first came from an attorney in Albany, New York, representing a man named Thurman Sutterly. The letter identified Sutterly as Leland Etchison's great-nephew and rightful heir, and it demanded that Norine's desist from any sale, transfer, or disposition of assets found on the Etchison property, pending a full accounting and the resolution of the Sutterly family's hereditary claim. Is this serious? Norine asked Cottrell. It is a letter, Cottrell said. Whether it is serious depends on whether he can establish he is even related to Etchison at all. And even if he can, it does not change my analysis of the personal property. It will slow the quiet title action down, maybe 2 to 4 months. In 26 years, I have never seen one of these arrive before the local paper ran a story. And the Courier ran theirs 3 weeks ago. But Bertie, whose curiosity about Leland Etchison's story had become something closer to a personal mission, did some research of her own. She cross-referenced the Albany law firm, listed on Thurman's letter with public business filings, and what she found made her drive straight to Cottrell's office the next morning. The firm shared a registered address in Albany with a real estate development company, the same company where Wardell Telford, the man who had left his business card on Norine's porch railing during her first week, was listed as a managing partner. Thurman's legal challenge and Telford's visit were not coincidences. They were connected. Cottrell filed that information away carefully. He did not share it with the court yet. It was too early. But he told Norine to expect that this would get harder before it got easier. The second letter arrived 2 days after the first. Norine almost did not open it. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope the moment she pulled it from the mailbox, standing at the end of Birch Hollow Road in a cold wind that smelled like pine, sap, and coming snow. It was Darnell's handwriting. The same loops and curves she had watched him develop from the time he was old enough to hold a pencil. Two. The letters were more polished now. Two. More controlled. Two. But the architecture of them was the same. Two. And seeing it on the envelope made something in her chest contract in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Two. She carried the letter inside and sat at the kitchen table, the wood stove ticking behind her, and held the envelope unopened for a long time. She was not sure whether she was afraid of what was inside or afraid of discovering that she still hoped for something she had already learned not to expect. The letter was 3 pages. It began, "Mom, I saw the article in the Courier, and I have been thinking about you so much. Boo. I cannot tell you how relieved I was to know you were okay. Boo." It said he had been worried sick since she left. That he understood now the apartment situation was not right. Boo. That with everything that had happened, boo. With this discovery, boo. There were probably a lot of legal and financial complexities, boo. And he would hate for her to navigate that alone at her age, boo. He could come up and help her sort through it like old times. Its final paragraph said he had spoken to an elder law attorney just to understand the landscape, about options for managing significant new assets when there are questions about an individual's capacity. "This is not about control, Mom," the letter said, boo. "I just want what is best for you." Norine read the letter 3 times, folded it back into its envelope, and drove to see Cottrell the next morning. Boo. He used the words questions about an individual's capacity. Cottrell said after reading the letter, "That is what it says, boo. Has anyone, anyone, boo, ever actually raised a question about your capacity? No, physical, in March. Doctor said I was in better shape than men 20 years younger." Norine paused. "He had me sign that power of attorney back when I trusted him. Boo, I never revoked it. I just moved the money and left. I do not even know if it is still active." Something in Cottrell's posture changed. Boo. His shoulders squared and his eyes narrowed, and his pen stopped moving, the way a mechanic goes still when he hears a sound from an engine that should not be there. "Bring me that paperwork today," he said. "Boo, if that document is still active, boo. And now there is a public article about you recovering significant assets, boo. And your son is independently consulting elder law attorneys about your capacity 3 weeks later. Boo, we need to act now, boo. Not tomorrow now." One phone call to the credit union confirmed it. The power of attorney had never been revoked. It was still technically active, still granting Darnell full authority over Norine's financial accounts. Cottrell prepared a written revocation that afternoon. Norine signed it in his office, and he sent certified copies to Darnell's address in Burlington and to the credit union, so the institution had clear record that the authority was terminated. But they were 12 hours too late. The next morning, Norine received a call from the credit union. Darnell had already contacted them. Using the still active power of attorney, he had requested a freeze on Norine's account, citing concerns about his mother's capacity and the possibility that she was being financially exploited by individuals in Ash Grove. The credit union, bound by the legal authority of the document, had placed a temporary hold on all transactions pending verification. Norine sat in Cottrell's office with the phone still in her hand and felt the floor shift beneath her the way it shifts in an earthquake. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow rolling wrongness that makes you grab for something solid and realize there is nothing to grab. Everything she had deposited, the cash, the silver proceeds, the account she had protected from Darnell, by moving it to this very institution, was now frozen. The bearer certificates were still with the examiner in Burlington. The quiet title action on the 40 acres was pending, and her own son had just used the document she had signed in trust to lock her out of her own money. Cottrell called the credit union directly with the certified revocation. He spoke in the measured, precise language of a lawyer who understands that urgency and panic are not the same thing. The revocation was legally valid as of the moment Norine signed it, he explained. Any action taken under the prior authority after revocation was void. The credit union's compliance officer agreed in principle, but said the hold would need to go through internal review, standard procedure. 2 to 3 business days. Those 72 hours were the longest of Norine's life, since the nights in the recliner listening for Kermit's breathing. On the first day of the freeze, she went to the hardware store to buy stovepipe cement for a joint that had started leaking smoke into the workshop. Willard rang it up the way he always did, on the running tab he kept in a ledger behind the counter. He did not know about the frozen account. Nobody in town did yet. But Norine stood at the counter, holding a $7 tube of cement, and felt the weight of it differently than she had felt any purchase before. because every dollar she spent from this point forward was a dollar she could not replace until a bank in Burlington decided that her own money belonged to her again. Ew. She thought about what it would mean if the freeze lasted longer than 3 days. She thought about the electrician's final invoice, still unpaid. Ew. She thought about the bearer certificates sitting in an examiner's office in Burlington, authenticated but undisbursed, worth more than she had ever had in her life, and completely out of her reach. Ew. She thought about her son, sitting in a house she had paid for, in a city where she had raised him, making phone calls that were designed to take away everything she had rebuilt from the wreckage he had made of her life, And she bought the stovepipe cement and drove home and fixed the leaking joint and did not tell anyone what was happening, because she had learned a long time ago that the difference between surviving and not surviving is the ability to keep working while the ground shifts beneath you, On the second day, Wardle Telford came back to Birch Hollow Road. This time he did not pretend to be driving through, He parked his SUV in Norine's gravel lot and walked to the workshop where she was sharpening a blade on a grinding wheel, her hands steady, even though the account that held every dollar she had was locked behind a legal wall her own son had built. Telford got to the point quickly. He said he wanted to make a fair offer. $150,000 for the entire 51-acre property. The house, the barn, the workshop, 40 acres pending the quiet title resolution. He called it a generous figure for a woman in her situation. He said he understood there were legal complications. The claim from Thurman Sutterly, the question of the quiet title. He said his company had the resources to absorb those complications, and that Norine did not have to spend what might be the rest of her good years fighting in courtrooms. Norine turned off the grinder. The workshop went quiet except for the ticking of the wood stove and the wind against the barn wall outside. "No," she said, "Mrs. Birdsall. I do not think you understand what you are turning down. I understand exactly what I am turning down. I also understand that you and Thurman Sutterly share a mailing address in Albany. My lawyer understands it too." Something shifted in Telford's face, a tightening around the eyes that told Norine she had landed the punch where it counted. He recovered quickly. He was a man who had negotiated land deals before and knew how to absorb a setback without showing it. "Thurman has good attorneys, Mrs. Birdsall. A quiet title action can take years. Your account is frozen. You have a son raising questions about your capacity. Are you sure you want to spend your remaining years in a courtroom?" Willard Tidwell's truck pulled into the gravel lot at that moment, loaded with lumber for a shelf unit Norine had ordered for the workshop. Willard climbed out, saw Telford, looked at Norine's face, and read the situation in a single glance the way people in small towns read situations, not from words but from posture and proximity and the quality of the silence between two people. Willard walked over and stood beside Norine. He did not say much. He did not need to. "Mrs. Birdsall already answered," he said. Telford looked at the two of them standing together in front of the workshop that Norine had built from a collapsing barn with borrowed tools and extended credit, and the kind of stubbornness that looks a lot like faith if you squint hard enough. Then he got back in his SUV and drove down Birch Hollow Road. The credit union released the hold on the third day. Cottrell confirmed the revocation had been processed and all authority terminated. Norine's accounts were hers again, but the 72 hours had cost her something that money could not replace. The last thin membrane of doubt about her son's intentions had torn away cleanly, and what was left underneath was not anger, it was clarity. The terrible, steady clarity of a woman who now knew exactly what her child was willing to do for money. 3 days before Christmas, a silver SUV turned off Birch Hollow Road and parked beside Norine's truck. Virgil Purcell was in the workshop that afternoon, helping true up a bent tractor axle from Danworth's farm. He glanced at the unfamiliar car, then at Norine's face, and quietly set down his tools. "I should head home, Mrs. Birdsall." It was not really true, but Norine understood it for what it was. The young man giving her room. Darnell got out in a wool coat that looked like it cost more than Norine's truck, and for a moment, he just stood there, looking at the house. For real, a new roof, the rebuilt porch, the steady smoke from the chimney, the Birdsall sign, the gravel lot where Danworth's truck and Estel's car and Virgil's motorcycle were parked. He was seeing his mother's work for the first time, and Norine watched him see it and felt nothing she could name. He stopped, recalibrated. "It is a lot, Mom, too." The money, Fu. The land, Du. At your age, dealing with lawyers and town records and people you do not know. I just do not want you to feel like you have to do all this alone. I am not alone, Norine said. I mean family, Mom. I know what you mean. She wiped her hands on a rag, slowly. Fitu. Darnell, last week I got a letter from a lawyer in Albany from a man claiming to be Etchison's great-nephew, wanting everything I found, Fu. And I got a letter from you the same week, talking about my capacity to a lawyer you found on your own. Less than 3 weeks after a newspaper said I had come into some money. Then you called my bank and froze my account using a power of attorney I signed because I trusted you. Fu, I am 74, not stupid. Fu, and I have spent 40 years reading blueprints. I know what it looks like when two things line up even when nobody says so out loud. Mom, that is not. His composure cracked for just a second. Fu. She saw something underneath it that might have been shame, or might have been simple frustration at being read so plainly by the woman who had taught him to read in the first place. Fu. You took my house, Darnell. You had me out in 3 weeks with 2 suitcases into an apartment you picked without asking me, and you did not call again, not once, until a newspaper told you I had found something worth having. I revoked that power of attorney. Fu. My lawyer sent the paperwork to you and to my bank before your letter even arrived. Fu, whatever that elder law attorney told you about options, tell them it is done. There is nothing of mine left for anyone to manage. And there has not been since the day you packed my life into 2 suitcases. I am your son, Darnell said. And this time his voice broke. Fu. Norine watched him. She believed the break was real. Fu. She could hear it in the way his breath caught, in the slight tremor in his jaw. But she no longer trusted what it meant. A real feeling and a good intention are not the same thing. And Norine had learned that lesson in the hardest possible classroom. You are, she said, more quietly, Fu. And if you ever come back here, Fu, not because of money, Fu, not because of 40 acres some Albany lawyers fighting me over, Fu, but because you want to know how your mother is doing, Fu. That door is not locked. I mean that. But it is not open today, not for this. She gestured, not unkindly, toward his car. Darnell stood there a moment longer in the cold, in front of the house rebuilt by the woman he had thrown away. Then he got back in the SUV and drove off down Birch Hollow Road. Fu. Norine watched the tail lights disappear past Danworth's place and felt not triumph, not quite peace, but something steadier than either, feeling of a floor finally holding the weight it had been built to hold. She went back inside. She put a log on the fire. Fu. She sat in the kitchen where the wood stove ticked, and the windows were dark, and the house she had rebuilt with her own hands held the warmth the way a good house should. Fu. And she did not cry. She had done her crying on the floor of this house when she had nothing. Now she's had something. Not everything. Not what she had lost, Fu, but something that was hers, built by her hands on ground that nobody else had wanted, and that was enough to sit with in the silence and feel steady, Fu. But what Norine did not know, sitting by that fire on the night before Christmas Eve, was that Darnell Birdsall had not driven back to Burlington to accept what she had told him. He had driven back to Burlington to make a phone call, Fu. And 2 weeks after Christmas, a set of court papers would arrive at the Birch Hollow Road farmhouse that would make even Orville Cottrell sit in his office chair for a long, quiet moment before he could bring himself to pick up the phone and tell Norine what her son had done. The court papers arrived on a Wednesday in January, Fu, delivered by a county process server who drove up Birch Hollow Road in a sedan that did not belong there and handed Norine a manila envelope on her own porch she had rebuilt with her own hands, Fu, and asked her to sign for it. He signed. She carried the envelope inside, Fu. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened it and read the first page twice, because the first time through the words did not make sense, not because they were complicated, because they were impossible. Darnell had filed a petition for guardianship, Fu. The petition, Fu, prepared and filed by an attorney named Glennis Chetwood, who specialized in elder law out of Burlington, Fu, asked the Caldwell County Probate Court to appoint Darnell Birdsall as legal guardian over the person estate of Norine Birdsall, Fu, on the grounds that she was a 74-year-old woman living in isolation in a formerly condemned rural property, Fu, had recently come into possession of significant financial assets under circumstances that raised questions about her judgment and vulnerability to exploitation, Fu, and was exhibiting patterns of behavior inconsistent with sound decision-making, Fu, including the expenditure of large sums without professional financial oversight, reliance on unvetted individuals in a small community, and refusal to accept family support. The petition cited concerns about cognitive decline. It referenced the directive Norine had signed months earlier. It requested that the court order a mandatory capacity evaluation and, pending the outcome, freeze all major financial transactions and suspend any ongoing legal proceedings related to the estate, including the quiet title action on the 40 acres. Norine read the petition a third time. Then she folded it back into the envelope and drove to Orville Cottrell's office. Cottrell read it, standing up. He did not sit down until he reached the final page. And when he did sit, he did it slowly, the way a man sits, when he needs a moment to choose his words carefully, and knows that the wrong ones will do more harm than the truth. Freeze is what he was planning, Cottrell said. The freeze on your account was not the main attack. It was preparation. He wanted to establish a pattern. First the account freeze, now this. Each step makes the next one look more reasonable to a judge. Can he do this? Norine asked. Anyone can file a petition. The question is whether the court takes it seriously enough to order the evaluation and the asset freeze. And the answer to that depends on the evidence. What evidence does he have? Cottrell tapped the petition. He has the directive you signed. He has the fact that you are 74 and living alone in a rural area. He has the newspaper article describing a significant financial discovery. And he has an attorney who knows how to frame all of that in language that sounds like concern even when it is not. What he does not have is a single medical professional who has ever questioned your capacity, and that is the gap we drive through. Cottrell paused. There is something else, the timing. This petition, if the court grants even a temporary freeze on your transaction, stops the quiet title action dead. And that is exactly what Thurman Sutterly needs. Time. Every month the 40 acres stay in limbo is another month his attorneys can maneuver. I do not think your son understands that he is being used, but I also do not think it matters whether he understands it or not. The effect is the same, too. Norine sat in the chair across from Cottrell's desk and looked out the window at Main Street, at the pharmacy below, and the diner across the road, and the hardware store where Willard Tidwell was probably free-stocking shelves, and not thinking about courtrooms or legal petitions, or the particular cruelty of a son who files paperwork to take control of his mother's life 3 weeks after she told him the door was open, but not today. She thought about quitting. Not in the dramatic way, not walking away from the property or giving in to Darnell or selling to Telford, but in the quiet way, the way you quit when you are 74 and tired. And the fight has been going on so long that you cannot remember what it felt like before the fighting started. She thought about how easy it would be just stop, to let the lawyers handle it. To sit in the house on Birch Hollow Road and wait for the court to decide whether she was competent to live her own life, and to accept whatever they decided because accepting was easier than proving again, that she deserved what she had built. The thought lasted about 30 seconds. Then she looked at Cottrell and said, "What do we need to do?" The hearing was scheduled for late February. In the weeks before it, Cottrell prepared his case with the thoroughness of a man who understood that this was not just a legal proceeding but a referendum on whether a 74-year-old woman had the right to live on her own terms. He gathered medical records. He contacted Norine's physician in Burlington, who confirmed in writing that her most recent physical examination showed her to be in excellent health for her age, with no cognitive concerns noted or suspected. He compiled a timeline of every repair, every purchase, every financial decision Norine had made since arriving in Ashgrove, each one documented, each one reasonable, each one demonstrating the kind of careful, systematic thinking that is the opposite of impaired judgment. Glennis Chetwood requested a pre-hearing conference, and Cottrell agreed. They met in the courthouse in St. Johnsbury, in a small conference room, with a table too large for the space and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly unwell. Chetwood was younger than Cottrell, sharper in her presentation, and spoke with the clinical precision of someone who had built a career on making reasonable arguments about unreasonable situations. Mrs. Birdsall, 74 years old, Chetwood said. She is living in isolation on a rural property that was uninhabitable when she purchased it. She has come into possession of a significant sum of money found buried in a basement, and she has spent that money rapidly, without the guidance of a financial advisor, while relying on a small group of individuals she met only months ago. She has no family support structure in place. She has refused her son's repeated attempts to provide assistance, This is a textbook profile of vulnerability to exploitation, and my client's concern is not only reasonable but legally responsible. Cottrell let her finish, too. Then he spoke. Mrs. Birdsall rewired a house, too. Rebuilt a porch, too. Restored a chimney, too. Replaced a well, too. And established a functioning repair business in less than 6 months. She did this while managing complex legal proceedings with my office, maintaining detailed financial records, and earning the trust of a community that does not give trust easily. Her physician has confirmed she is in excellent physical and mental health. She has no history of cognitive impairment, no diagnosis, no medical concern of any kind. The only person who has raised questions about her capacity is the same person who used a power of attorney to sell her home, move her into an apartment she did not choose, and freeze her bank account when she found a way to start over without him. Chetwood had one more card. She produced a copy of the Healthcare Advance Directive and argued that Norine had herself acknowledged the potential need for surrogate decision-making by signing the document. Cottrell was ready for that. That directive is a standard precautionary document signed by millions of competent Americans every year, he said. It is not an admission of incapacity. It is a contingency plan. If signing one were evidence of cognitive decline, every responsible adult in this country would be subject to guardianship proceedings. Chetwood did not respond to that directly. She did not need to. The argument would be made before the judge, and they both knew it. The night before the hearing, Norine sat alone in the kitchen on Birch Hollow Road. The fire was low. The house was quiet. Outside, the Vermont winter pressed against the windows with the particular silence of deep cold, the kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath, too. Norine was holding hers too, though she did not realize it until she heard the knock on the door and released it all at once. Willard Tidwell stood on the porch with a toolbox in his hand. Not just any toolbox, his good one, the one with the brass latches and the leather handle that he kept behind the counter and only brought out for work he considered worth doing right. Heard you have to be at the courthouse tomorrow, Willard said. Norine opened the door wider. She'd a town of 600 people. Information traveled through the walls. I will be there, Willard said. So will Estelle and Danworth. He paused. Willa too. Norine looked at the toolbox in his hand. You did not need to bring that tonight. I know, Willard said. I just wanted you to see it. Wanted you to know that the people who have watched you work are going to be in that room tomorrow. And that matters. It matters because a judge can read a medical report and see numbers. But a judge can also look at a courtroom and see who showed up and who did not. He set the toolbox down on the porch, nodded once, and drove away. Norine stood in the doorway for a long time after his taillights disappeared down the gravel road, and she did not think about quitting again. The hearing took place in the Caldwell County Probate Court on a Tuesday morning that was cold enough to freeze the moisture in Norine's breath before it left her lips. She drove herself through. She wore clean work clothes, not a suit, because she had never owned a suit, and she was not going to pretend to be someone she was not in order to prove she was competent to be herself. Courtroom was small, wood-paneled walls, an American flag in the corner, a judge's bench that looked like it had been built by someone who cared about wood the way Norine cared about wood, with dovetail joints visible at the corners, too. Darnell sat on the far side of the room with Glennis Chetwood. He was wearing a blazer. He did not look at Norine when she entered. He looked at the table in front of him, at his hands, at the papers Chetwood had arranged in a neat stack, beside a legal pad. He looked at everything in the room except his mother. Norine looked at him, too. She looked at the man her son had become, sitting 20 feet away in a courtroom, asking a judge to decide whether she was capable of living her own life. And she remembered him at 5 years old, running into her workshop after school, holding up a drawing of a house with smoke coming from the chimney and a woman standing in front of it with a wrench in her hand. Mom, look what I made. That was the boy. This was the man, and the distance between them was not 20 feet. It was something much farther and much harder to cross. Cottrell called his witnesses. Norine's physician testified by phone. He confirmed that her most recent examination showed no cognitive concerns, that her physical health was excellent for her age, and that he had treated her for over a decade and had never observed any indication of impaired judgment or declining mental function. Willard Tidwell took the stand next. He was not a man comfortable with public speaking, and he sat in the witness chair with his hands on his knees and his jaw set in the way of someone who would rather be holding a wrench than answering questions. But when Cottrell asked him to describe his interactions with Norine Birdsall over the past 8 months, Willard spoke clearly and without hesitation. She came into my store the first week with nothing, he said. No money to speak of, no help, no one. She bought what she needed, and she knew exactly what she needed, because she understood construction the way I understand hardware. She never bought anything she did not use. Never asked for anything she could not explain. And every time she came in, she had made progress on that house. That would have been respectable work for a crew of 3, let alone a woman working alone at 74. I extended her credit because I trusted her judgment. I still trust it. I would trust it with my own property. Estelle Goodnow followed. She described watching Norine earn the respect of a community that did not give it freely. Through work, through consistency, through showing up and doing what she said she would do. She described the repair business, the neighbors Norine had helped, the quiet way she had become someone people relied on without ever asking to be relied upon. Dalton Danworth testified next. He was 81 years old and moved slowly to the witness chair, and when he sat down, he looked directly at the judge with the steady gaze of a man who had lived long enough to know the difference between paper authority and genuine character. That woman welded my wood stove in October, Danworth said. 3 days, no charge. The stove shop in Burlington quoted me $2,200 in a 6-week wait. She drove up to my house with her tools in the back of her truck, and she fixed it right, and she fixed it so it will last. And when I tried to pay her, she said, that is what neighbors do. If that is a woman who lacks capacity, then I want to meet more people without capacity, because she has more of it than most folks half her age. And then Willa Danworth stood up. She had not been called as a witness. She was sitting in the gallery, in the second row, in a heavy wool coat with her purse on her lap, and she stood up without being asked and without looking at Cottrell for permission, and said, in a voice that carried across the courtroom, the way only the voice of a 78-year-old woman who has stopped caring about protocol can carry, Your Honor, I would like to say something. The judge, who had been presiding over hearings in this courthouse for 20 years, looked at Willa Danworth and made a judgment of his own. He nodded. I was the first person in this town who did not trust her, Willa said. I told her to her face that outsiders come up here and buy cheap land to flip. I was rude about it. I was wrong about it. And I found out I was wrong because I watched her. I watched her fix my husband's stove. I watched her rebuild her porch. I watched her teach that Purcell boy how to work on engines the way somebody should have taught him years ago. And I watched her turn a house that nobody in this county wanted for 40 years into a place where people come on Thursday nights to sit by the fire and drink coffee and talk about nothing important, which is exactly what this county has been missing for a long time. She paused and looked across the room at Darnell, and her voice did not waver. If her son knew his mother half as well as I know her, after 6 months, he would not be sitting on that side of this courtroom. The courtroom was quiet for a moment after Willa sat down. The kind of quiet that happens when something true has been said, and everyone in the room knows it. Cottrell made his closing argument. He presented the evidence of the connection between Thurman Sutterly's legal challenge and Wardell Telford's development company, showing the shared Albany address, coordinated timing of Thurman's claim and Telford's visits, and the fact that the guardianship petition, if granted, would freeze the quiet title action on the 40 acres. At precisely the moment Thurman's own claim was weakest, the petition, Cottrell argued, was not about Norine Birdsall's capacity. It was about 40 acres of developable land. And her son, whether he understood it fully or not, was being used as an instrument to delay a legal proceeding that stood to cost a real estate developer a significant opportunity. The judge ruled from the bench. He denied the guardianship petition in its entirety. There is no evidence before this court, he said, that Mrs. Birdsall lacks the capacity to manage her own affairs. To the contrary, the evidence suggests a woman of considerable competence, resourcefulness, and community standing. This petition is dismissed. Norine did not look at Darnell when the ruling was read. She looked at the judge's bench, at the dovetail joints in the woodwork, and she thought about the person who had built that bench and whether they had known that someday the thing they made would hold up a moment like this one. Norine sat in the courtroom for a moment after the ruling. while people stood and gathered their things, and the ordinary noise of a room returning to itself filled the space where the judge's voice had been. Willard was the first to reach her. He did not say congratulations. He said, "You need anything from the store on the way home?" Boo. It was the most Willard thing anyone had ever said in a courtroom, and it made Norine smile for the first time in weeks. Estelle squeezed her shoulder as she passed, too. Dalton Danworth shook her hand with both of his grip still strong at 81, Boo, and said, "You did good, Boo." Willa just nodded at her from across the room, Boo, a single, firm nod, kind, that carries more weight than a speech, Boo. Bertie Kittredge was already taking notes, because Bertie took notes on everything, and Norine suspected this hearing would be filed in the Caldwell County Archive before the week was out. She thanked each of them, Boo. She thanked Cottrell, who accepted her thanks with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done his job, and done it well, and did not need applause to know it, Boo. And then she walked into the hallway. Outside the courthouse, in the hallway with its linoleum floor and its buzzing overhead lights, Darnell stood alone. Chetwood had already left, Boo. Darnell was standing by the window, looking out at the parking lot, and for the first time Norine could remember he was not wearing the blazer. He was not checking his phone, Boo. He was just standing there, a 45-year-old man who looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He turned when he heard her footsteps. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and what came out was not an excuse, not a justification, not an argument. Boo, "I am sorry about the house, Mom." Boo, "About Linden Street, not about the money, not about the 40 acres, not about the guardianship petition or the frozen account or the elder law attorney, just about the house where she and Kermit had raised him, Boo. The house with the lace curtains and the sewing machine and the reading glasses on the nightstand. The house he had sold out from under her in 3 weeks, Boo." Norine looked at her son. She nodded once. She did not speak. She did not reach for him. But she did not turn away either, Boo. She held his gaze for a long moment, long enough for him to see that she had heard him. And then she walked through the courthouse door and out into the cold February air, and she did not look back, Boo. She drove home alone, Boo. The road from St. Johnsbury back to Ashgrove took just over an hour on Route 14, winding through the kind of Vermont landscape that looks like a postcard in summer, and like the surface of another planet in February, full bare branches and gray sky and snow packed along the shoulders in dirty ridges, Boo. Norine drove with the windows up and the heater running and the radio off, Boo. And somewhere around the halfway point, Boo, on a stretch of road that ran between two frozen pastures, Boo. She pulled the truck onto the shoulder and stopped, Boo. She sat there with the engine idling and her hands on the wheel and looked out at the fields and the tree line and the mountains beyond, all of it still and cold and empty, and she let herself feel what she had not allowed herself to feel in the courtroom. The grief, Boo, not anger, not any more grief. For the boy who used to draw houses with smoke coming from the chimney, or for the man that boy had become. For the distance between those two people, which was not 20 feet across a courtroom but something much wider, something measured in choices made and trust broken and years that could not be undone. She sat there for maybe 5 minutes, Boo. Then she put the truck in gear and drove the rest of the way home. And when she turned onto Birch Hollow Road and saw the house standing there against the tree line, with smoke rising from the chimney she had rebuilt, she felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for months. The house was still there. She was still there. And that was enough. Thurman Sutterly's claim collapsed over the next 2 months, Boo. Bertie Kittredge, who had appointed herself an unofficial member of Cottrell's legal team out of sheer enthusiasm, and a personal investment in Leland Etchison's legacy that went back to her own family's rescued farm, threw herself into the genealogical research with an intensity that would have been intimidating if it had been directed at anything other than old property records, Boo. She spent weeks in the county archives and the state library in Montpelier, tracing family trees and cross-referencing birth certificates and marriage records and estate filings. What she found was conclusive, Boo. Thurman's branch of the family had split from Leland Etchison's line 3 generations back over an unrelated Massachusetts property dispute, Boo. There was no documented relationship that would give him standing under Vermont law, and the evidence Cottrell had presented about the connection between Thurman's attorneys and Telford's development company had damaged his credibility beyond repair, Boo. His attorney quietly withdrew the claim in February without requesting a hearing, Boo. Bertie celebrated by filing every document she had assembled into the county archive, properly indexed and cross-referenced, because Bertie believed that history was only useful if someone could find it again. The quiet title action on the 40 acres was granted that spring, though Norine Birdsall now owned, free and clear, 51 acres on Birch Hollow Road, to a farmhouse restored enough to be called a home again, to a working workshop, and a small but growing reputation as the woman who had found Leland Etchison's secret and, in her own quiet way, kept doing what Etchison had once done. Wardell Telford made one final attempt. A letter arrived in April, offering $200,000 for the entire property, double his previous number, with a handwritten note at the bottom that said he hoped she would consider the long-term benefits of the offer. Norine did not respond to the letter. Instead, she spent the following week working with Cottrell and the County Conservation Board to place the 40 acres under a permanent conservation easement. The land would remain forest. It could never be developed. It could never be subdivided. It would stay exactly as Leland Etchison had left it, for as long as the trees kept growing. When Willard asked her why she did not sell even a portion of it, Norine said, Leland held on to that land for a reason, even if he never said what it was. I would just as soon it stay woods. That was also the last word on Wardell Telford. There was nothing left for him to buy. By summer, the barn had a new roof of its own, paid for from timber rights on a small portion of the 40 acres that the conservation easement allowed for sustainable harvesting. The rest of the barn became, with Virgil's help and Willard's tools and donated equipment from half the county, a proper workshop. The sign now read Birdsall and Purcell's. Norine had added Virgil's name the week the young man turned 20, on the condition that he finish his vocational training program first. Virgil had agreed without argument. He understood that the condition was not about paperwork. It was about earning the right to have your name on something that was built to last. On Thursday evenings, the workshop became something else, a gathering point. Danworth would arrive first, walking slowly up the path from where Willa dropped him off, settling to the chair by the wood stove, with the patience of a man who had spent 81 years learning that the best parts of any day were the parts you did not rush through. Willa would follow, carrying a thermos or a plate of something she had baked that afternoon. Estelle would come after closing the diner, bringing the coffee she had been brewing for Ashgrove for 20 years. Willard would lean against the workshop door frame, with his arms crossed, contributing to conversations only when he had something worth saying, which, by Willard's standards, meant about one sentence per hour. Bertie would bring a folder of something she had found in the archives, some new piece of the Etchison story, some old deed or letter or tax record that added another detail to the portrait of a man who had given away a fortune one farm at a time and never asked for anything in return. Fuel. They talked about engines and weather and the price of fuel, and whether the county was going to fix the bridge on Route 14 before it collapsed entirely. They talked about people they had known and seasons they had survived, and the ordinary business of getting through a Vermont year without anyone having to face it alone, too. And sometimes, when the fire was right and the coffee was strong, and the conversation had settled into the comfortable silence that only exists between people who do not need to fill every quiet moment with noise, Norine would look around the room at these faces, these people who had taken her in, not because she asked, but because she showed up, and she would feel something she had not felt since the last time she sat with Kermit in the kitchen on Linden Street and watched the evening light come through his curtains. She would feel held, not by arms, by presence, by the steady, ordinary, irreplaceable fact of people who chose to be in the same room with you at the end of the day. Norine kept Leland Etchison's ledger in a glass case near the workshop door, beside a framed copy of the newspaper article and a small brass plaque that Bertie had insisted on commissioning. The plaque read simply, "In memory of Leland A. Etchison, who asked for nothing and gave what he could. This house remembers." She never heard from Thurman Sutterly again. She never heard from Wardell Telford again. She heard from Darnell exactly twice more. The first was a card at Christmas. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address, though the postmark said Burlington. Inside was a store-bought card with a winter scene on the front, bare trees against a gray sky. Darnell had signed only his name. No message, no explanation, no apology. Just his name in the handwriting she had known since he was old enough to hold a pencil. Norine put the card on the kitchen windowsill, where she could see it when she washed dishes in the morning. Phew. She did not know why she put it there. She did not examine the impulse. She just did it. The way you do things when the feeling behind them is too complicated to name and too real to ignore. Phew. The second card arrived in late spring, when the snow had finally melted, and the woods along Birch Hollow Road were thick with the green of new growth, and the air smelled like mud and pine, and the particular sweetness of Vermont in May that makes you understand why people stay in a place with winters that try to kill them. The envelope was the same plain white. The postmark was the same Burlington. But this time, there was a note inside. I hope the house is warm. I think about Dad's sewing machine sometimes. I am sorry, Mom. Norine read it 3 times. Phew. She read it the way she had read his first letter 3 times. The one about capacity and elder law attorneys. But this time, the repetition was not about searching for a hidden threat. Phew. It was about making sure she had understood what was there. Those 3 sentences. That's full careful I am sorry that did not try to explain itself or justify itself or ask for anything in return. Just the apology standing alone, the way an apology should stand if it means anything at all. She did not drive into town to undo anything. Phew. She did not call Cottrell. She did not write back. She put the card in the kitchen drawer. Phew. The same drawer where she now kept Kermit's reading glasses, the ones the Linden Street buyers had found in an attic box after the sale, and mailed to her at her gentle request, forwarded through Cottrell's office because she did not want Darnell to know she had asked for them. Phew. The glasses sat in the drawer next to a worn pencil, spare key to the workshop. Phew. And now these 2 cards from her son. Phew. And the drawer held all of these things together, the way a life holds its contradictions together. Phew. Not by resolving them, but by making room. Phew. She did not throw the card away. She did not write back. She did not call. The door, as she had told him on that cold day before Christmas, was not locked. It just was not open yet. Phew. And Norine had learned, in the month since she arrived on Birch Hollow Road with nothing but 2 suitcases and a toolbox and a truck that needed new brake pads, that there was a difference between a door that was closed and a door that was waiting. 4 is a decision. A waiting door is a possibility, too. And at 74, Norine Birdsall had more respect for possibility than she had ever had in her life, because she had watched it grow in a place where everyone, including herself, had expected nothing. She stood at the kitchen window on a morning in early June, holding a cup of coffee, looking out at the workshop and the barn and the gravel lot where Virgil's motorcycle was already parked, because the young man had started coming earlier and earlier, eager to start the day, eager to learn whatever Norine had to teach him next. The sign at the end of the driveway read Birdsall and Purcell's, and the chimney was sending a thin line of smoke into the clear Vermont sky, and the porch she had rebuilt held the morning light the way a porch should, solid and level and welcoming, in the glass case by the workshop door, Leland Etchison's ledger sat open a page near the careful handwriting listing names and dates and dollar figures that represented not wealth but generosity, not power but patience, not a fortune hoarded but a fortune given away one quiet act at a time, by a man who understood something that most people never learn, that the things you keep are not what define you. The things you give are. Norine Birdsall had come to Birch Hollow Road with nothing. She had found a house that nobody wanted, built on land that nobody claimed, holding a secret that nobody knew. She had rebuilt the house with her own hands. She had uncovered the secret with her own curiosity. She had defended what she built against a developer who wanted to buy it, a stranger who wanted to claim it, and a son who wanted to control it. And she had done all of this, not because she was extraordinary, but because she was stubborn and skilled and unwilling to let someone else decide that her story was over. And for the first time in 2 years, Norine Birdsall found that she did not need anyone's permission, not Darnell's, not the court's, not the town's. Feel every morning she woke up on Birch Hollow Road, like a woman who had finally, at 74, come home. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video and leave a comment. We would love to know where you are watching from, or which part of Norine's story hit you the hardest. And if you have not already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we post a new story like this every day. Stories about second chances, hidden truths, and the families we build along the way. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.